Hey, my name is Arthur Holden. I'm 74 years old, and 2 days ago, I found a letter inside my mother's Bible that made me pull over on the side of Route 9 and cry like I haven't cried since the day I buried my wife. I need to tell you how I got there, and I need to tell you what happened after, because if I don't say it out loud, I'm afraid the weight of it will follow me into the ground. But before I take you back, you need to understand one thing. For 52 years, I believed the woman I loved had forgotten me. And for 52 years, she believed I had forgotten her. We were both wrong, and the person who made sure we'd never find that out was my own mother. Let me start where things ended, or where I thought they ended. I grew up in a small town called Dalton, in the hill country of eastern Tennessee. My father, George Holden, ran the only hardware store on Main Street. My mother, Pauline, taught Sunday school and kept a house so clean you could eat dinner off the porch floor. We weren't wealthy, but we were respectable, and to my mother, respectability was the currency that mattered most. She pressed my shirts before school. She corrected my grammar at the table. She chose my friends the way other mothers chose curtains, by how well they matched the room she was trying to build. I was her only son. She had plans for me, and those plans did not include Evelyn Carver. Evelyn lived 4 miles outside of town, in a house with a sagging porch and paint peeling off the shutters. Her father drank. Her mother worked double shifts at the canning factory and still couldn't keep the electricity on some months. Evelyn walked to school in shoes that had been resoled twice, carried her books in a cloth bag her grandmother had sewn, and sat in the back row of every classroom like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. She was quiet, she was careful, and she had the kind of face that made you forget whatever you were about to say. I noticed her the first day of 10th grade. She was reading under the oak tree behind the school during lunch, and the wind blew a page out of her notebook. I picked it up. It was a drawing, a small detailed sketch of a bird sitting on a fence post. I looked at her and said something foolish like, "You drew this?" She nodded without smiling. "It's just a sparrow," she said. "Nobody draws sparrows. They draw eagles." I looked at the drawing again. Well, maybe the sparrow deserved it. She looked at me for a long time. Then she smiled, and I swear to you, everything that happened in my life after that moment can be traced back to that one smile. We became friends first, then something more. It happened slowly, the way things did back then, without drama, without declarations. I walked her home after school, even though it added 40 minutes to my route. I sat with her on the porch of that leaning house and listened to her talk about the places she wanted to see. She had never left Tennessee. She wanted to see the Pacific Ocean. She wanted to stand somewhere so wide and open that the sky didn't end at the tree line. I told her I'd take her there one day. She said, "Don't make promises you can't keep, Arthur Holden." I said, "Then I'll keep them." My mother noticed. Of course she did. Pauline Holden noticed everything. One evening she was waiting for me in the kitchen when I came home late. She didn't raise her voice. She never raised her voice. She simply looked at me and said, "Arthur, you've been spending time with the Carver girl." I didn't deny it. She folded her hands on the table. "That family has nothing. No land, no standing, no future. If you attach yourself to that girl, you will drag this family down with you. I love you too much to let you do that." I was 18. I didn't have the words to fight her, but I didn't stop seeing Evelyn either. I just got quieter about it. The summer after graduation, I got a job at a mill 60 miles north. It was the only work I could find that paid enough to start saving. Evelyn and I made a plan. I would work for a year, put money aside, and when I came back, we would leave together. We would go west. California, maybe. Somewhere with an ocean. She gave me a small pencil sketch the night before I left. It was the two of us sitting on a fence, drawn from behind, looking out at an empty horizon. On the back she had written, "I'll wait. I promise." I carried that sketch in my shirt pocket every single day for the next year. We wrote letters, every week without fail. I wrote to her about the mill, the noise, the men I worked with, the cold mornings, the way the mountains looked from the window of the bunkhouse. I told her about the foreman, who whistled the same song every morning, and the old man on the loading dock, who kept a photograph of his wife taped inside his lunchbox and looked at it before every meal. I told her I understood that man now. She wrote back about the garden she had planted, the book she was reading, a stray cat that had started sleeping on her porch. She told me about the first tomato she grew on her own and how she sat on the back step eating it like it was a victory. She told me she had started drawing again, mostly birds, mostly sparrows. Her letters smelled faintly of lavender. I read each one so many times the paper went soft at the folds. At night in the bunkhouse, When the other men were playing cards or sleeping, I would hold her letters under the lamp and trace her handwriting with my finger like I could feel her voice through the ink. Then in March, her letters stopped. 1 week passed, then 2, then a month. I wrote again and again, each letter more desperate than the last. Evelyn, are you all right? Did something happen? Please write back. Even one line. Nothing came. By June, I had written over a dozen letters with no reply. I called the general store in Dalton and asked if anyone had seen her. The man on the phone said the Carver family had moved. He didn't know where. I went home that summer hollow and confused. My mother met me at the door. She took one look at my face and said, "She moved on, Arthur. Girls like that always do. I'm sorry, but it's better you know now than after you've thrown your life away." I believed her. God help me, I believed her. Because the only alternative was that something terrible had happened to Evelyn, and believing she had simply stopped loving me was easier than imagining the worst. So I packed the sketch away, and I tried to move on. 3 years later, I married Helen Porter. She was a good woman, steady, kind, sensible. She laughed at my bad jokes and never once made me feel like I wasn't enough. We built a life together. I took over my father's hardware store after he passed. We bought a house on Maple Street. We had 2 children, a son named James and a daughter named Ruth. Helen made that house a home. She hung curtains in every window, kept flowers on the table year-round, and could stretch a pot of soup into 3 meals without anyone noticing. She taught the children to say grace before dinner and to write thank you notes by hand. She danced with me in the kitchen on Saturday nights when the radio played something slow, and she never once complained that I wasn't the kind of man who said romantic things easily. She just loved me the way rain loves soil. Quietly, steadily, without asking for anything dramatic in return. I loved her. I want to be clear about that. I loved Helen truly and deeply, and I was faithful to her in every way. But there was a room inside me that I kept locked. And inside that room was a sketch of 2 people on a fence, looking out at an ocean they never reached. Helen knew about it. She never said so directly. But once, years into our marriage, she found me sitting on the back porch staring at nothing. She sat down beside me and said quietly, "You're thinking about her again." I didn't answer. She took my hand. "I don't need to be the first woman you loved, Arthur. I just need to be the last." Those words broke something open in me and sealed something else shut at the same time. I turned to her and said, "You are," and I meant it. Helen died 11 years ago. Cancer. It was slow and ugly and unfair, the way it always is. She fought it with the same quiet determination she brought to everything else. Near the end, when she could barely lift her hand, she looked at me and whispered, "Don't sit in an empty house and call it loyalty. That's not what I want for you." I promised her I wouldn't, but I did exactly that. For 11 years, I ate breakfast alone, watched the news alone, drove to the store and back alone, sat on the porch alone. My children called on Sundays. My grandchildren visited on holidays. The rest of the time, the house was silent. I told myself it was peaceful. I told myself a man who had been loved well for 30 years had no right to complain about the quiet that came after. The truth was, I had simply forgotten what noise sounded like. The house didn't echo because it was empty. It echoed because I had stopped filling it with anything worth hearing. Then my mother died. Pauline Holden was 96 years old. She had lived alone in the old house on Birch Lane for the last 15 years, refusing every suggestion that she move in with me or into assisted living. "I raised you in this house," she said. "I intend to die in it." And she did. She went in her sleep on a Tuesday night in September, with the windows open and the sound of crickets filling the room. The funeral was small. She had outlived most of her friends. I sat in the front pew and felt the strange, guilty relief that comes when someone you loved but never fully understood is finally at rest. After the service, I went to her house to begin sorting through her things. It was the kind of task that takes weeks. Closets full of old dresses, drawers stuffed with recipes and church bulletins, boxes of photographs with names written on the backs in her careful handwriting. I worked slowly. Every item carried a memory, and some of them were heavy. On the 3rd day, I found her Bible. It was on the nightstand where it had always been, a thick leather-bound King James with gold edges and a cracked spine. She had read from it every night for as long as I could remember. I picked it up, and something shifted inside. A piece of paper slid out and landed on the floor. I bent down and picked it up. It was an envelope, yellowed with age, addressed in handwriting I hadn't seen in over 50 years. It was addressed to me, Arthur Holden, care of the Dalton General Post Office. The return address said Evelyn Carver. My hands started shaking. I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. The paper was thin and brittle. The ink had faded but was still readable. Dear Arthur, I don't understand why you've stopped writing. I wait for the mail every day. I've written you 6 letters and heard nothing back. Did I say something wrong? Did something happen? Please, Arthur, even if you've changed your mind about us, just tell me. I can take the truth. What I can't take is the silence. I love you. I have loved you since the day you told me the sparrow deserved to be drawn. Please write back. Yours always, Evelyn. The date on the letter was April 14th, 1972. I stood in my dead mother's bedroom, holding a letter that was 52 years old, and the room started tilting. I grabbed the Bible and shook it. 3 more letters fell out, all from Evelyn, all addressed to me, all opened, read, and hidden inside the pages of Scripture. The second letter was desperate. Arthur, this is my 7th letter. I don't know what I did. If you don't want me, please just say so. I can't keep waiting like this. My father is talking about moving us to Kentucky. If I don't hear from you, I'll have to go. Please. The third letter was short. We're leaving Friday. I begged my mother to let me stay, but there's nothing here for me anymore. I thought there was. I was wrong. Goodbye, Arthur. The fourth letter was postmarked from a town in Kentucky. It was dated 3 months later. I know you'll probably never read this. I don't even know why I'm writing. I just need you to know that I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because you stopped answering. If you ever think of me, know that I kept my promise. I waited. You didn't. I sat on the edge of my mother's bed and sobbed, not the quiet, dignified grief of a man who has buried a wife and attended 100 funerals. This was the raw, gasping, ugly kind of crying that comes when you realize the shape of your entire life was built on a lie. I cried for the boy who had waited at the mill for letters that were already sitting inside a Bible 3 rooms away from his mother's bed. I cried for the girl who had checked her mailbox every day until the day she left Tennessee. I cried for the 2 of them standing on a porch in the dark, making a promise they both kept and neither one knew. My mother had intercepted the letters. She had taken them from the mailbox before I could see them. She had read Evelyn's words, her confusion, her heartbreak, her pleading, and she had hidden them inside a Bible and never said a word. And I had spent 52 years believing Evelyn had stopped loving me. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough that the light changed in the room. Long enough that my hands stopped shaking and something colder and harder settled in my chest. I thought about confronting her, and then I remembered she was already in the ground. You can't argue with the dead. You can't demand an explanation from a headstone. All you can do is sit with the wreckage and decide what to do with the pieces. I drove home that night in a fog. I sat in my kitchen and stared at the letters spread across the table. I read them again and again until I had memorized every word. Then I asked myself the question I was terrified to answer. Was Evelyn still alive? I barely slept. The next morning I called my daughter Ruth. She's better with computers than I am. I told her I needed to find someone from a long time ago and gave her the name and the town in Kentucky from the last letter. Ruth didn't ask many questions. She could hear something in my voice. 2 hours later she called back. Dad, I found an Evelyn Carver. She's 72. She lives in a town called Mercer, about 3 hours from you. She's listed in the phone directory. 3 hours. 52 years. And she had been 3 hours away. My chest felt like someone was standing on it. Ruth asked quietly, Dad, who is she? I told her. Not everything. Not the letters. Not what my mother had done. Just enough. She was someone I cared about a very long time ago. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Do you want to go see her? I said, I don't know if I have the right. Ruth's answer surprised me. Dad, you're 74. If not now, when? She sounded so much like Helen in that moment that I had to close my eyes. I spent 2 days deciding. I drove to Helen's grave and sat beside it for an hour. I told her everything. The letters. My mother, Evelyn. I told her I felt guilty for even thinking about it. I told her I didn't know what I was looking for. Then I sat in the silence and waited, half hoping for some kind of sign. A breeze moved through the trees. A bird landed on the stone beside hers and sat there for a moment before flying off. I chose to believe that was enough. On a Thursday morning in October, I got into my truck and drove east. I had Evelyn's address written on a piece of paper on the passenger seat. I also had the 4 letters and the sketch she had drawn of the 2 of us on the fence. I don't know why I brought them. Maybe I needed proof. Maybe I needed her to know I hadn't thrown them away. that even the ones my mother hid had survived. The drive took just over 3 hours. The road wound through small towns that looked like Dalton but weren't, places where time moved slowly, and the hills stayed the same color they had been when I was young. When I crossed into Mercer, my hands tightened on the wheel. It was a small town, the kind with one traffic light and a post office that doubled as a general store. I found her street. It was a quiet road lined with old trees. The houses were small but kept up, gardens tended, porches swept. I parked across from number 14 and sat there for 15 minutes. The house was white with green shutters and a porch with 2 rocking chairs. There were flower boxes under the windows, full of late-season blooms. A wind chime hung near the door, turning slowly in the breeze. It looked like the kind of house someone had made into a home all by herself. I almost drove away. I sat there with the engine off, my hands gripping the steering wheel, and I thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. She might not remember me. She might not want to see me. She might have a husband, a family, a life that had nothing to do with a boy from Dalton who had disappeared without explanation 52 years ago. But then I looked at the letters on the seat beside me. I thought about her words. I kept my promise. I waited. You didn't. She deserved to know the truth. Even if she slammed the door in my face, she deserved to know that I never stopped writing, that I never stopped caring, that the silence she heard was not mine. I got out of the truck. My knees ached from the drive. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I crossed the street, walked up the 3 porch steps, and knocked on the door. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps, slow and careful, and the door opened. She was 72 years old. Her hair was silver now, pulled back the way she used to wear it. Her face had changed the way all faces change with time. Softer, lined, marked by years I knew nothing about. But her eyes were exactly the same. Dark brown, deep, the kind that looked at you like they were reading something written behind your ribs. She stared at me. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. I watched recognition move across her face like light crossing a room. It started with confusion, then disbelief, then something so raw and painful that I had to look away for a second. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked at me the way you look at a photograph you thought you had lost, searching for the version she remembered underneath the years, and the lines, and the gray hair. She whispered my name. Arthur. My voice came out rough. Hello, Evelyn. She didn't move. She didn't open the door wider. She just stood there, one hand on the frame, looking at me like I was a ghost who had wandered out of a decade she had spent a lifetime trying to forget. What are you doing here? She asked. Her voice was shaking. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the letters. I held them up so she could see. I found these 2 days ago, I said. Inside my mother's Bible. She hid them from me. Every single one. I never saw them, Evelyn. I never knew you wrote. She looked at the letters. I watched the color drain from her face. She reached out and took one, turned it over, saw her own handwriting. Her hand trembled. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. You never got them, she said. It wasn't a question. No, I said. I wrote to you every week for 6 months. When you didn't answer, I thought you had left. I thought you didn't want me anymore. Her eyes filled. She pressed the letter against her chest and made a sound that wasn't quite a word. It was the sound of something old and heavy finally breaking loose. I waited, she whispered. I waited for you in that house until my father made us leave. I checked the mailbox every single day. I thought you had changed your mind. I thought your mother had convinced you I wasn't good enough. She did, I said, but not the way you think. She didn't tell me to leave you. She just made sure your words never reached me. She let the silence do the rest. Evelyn covered her mouth with her hand. Tears ran over her fingers. She stepped back from the door, and I understood it as an invitation. I walked into her house. The living room was small and warm. There were books on every surface, paintings on the walls, a few framed photographs on the mantel. I saw no pictures of a husband, no men's shoes by the door, no second chair at the kitchen table. She saw me looking. I never married, she said quietly. I turned to face her. Never? She shook her head. I came close once. A good man, a teacher in Louisville. He asked me 3 times. I said no every time because I couldn't explain to him why I still checked the mail every morning, even though I hadn't been waiting for a letter in years. The words hit me so hard I had to sit down. She brought me water. We sat across from each other at her small kitchen table, the letters between us, and I told her everything. My mother's plan, the silence I had mistaken for rejection, My marriage to Helen, the children, the years of quiet love I had built on top of an unanswered question. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was very still. "Do you hate her?" she asked. "Your mother." I thought about it. "I want to," I said. "But she's dead. And hating the dead is like shouting into a well. The only person who hears it is you." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I hated you for a long time," she said. "Not the angry kind, the tired kind. The kind where you wake up one morning and realize you've spent 30 years being disappointed in someone who probably never thinks about you at all." "I thought about you," I said. "I never stopped." She looked at me. "You married someone else." "I did, and I loved her. But there was always a room I kept locked." She knew about it. She never asked me to open it. She just loved me around it. Evelyn's eyes softened. "She sounds like a good woman." She was. She died 11 years ago. "I'm sorry." "So am I." We sat in silence for a while. The kind of silence that isn't empty but full of everything two people can't say in one afternoon. 52 years of mornings and evenings and decisions and regrets, all sitting in the air between a glass of water and a stack of old letters. Finally, Evelyn reached across the table and turned over the sketch I had brought. The two of us on the fence, drawn in pencil, faded but still clear. She stared at it. "You kept this," she said, "in my shirt pocket for a year, in a box after that. I never threw it away." She traced the outline of the two figures with her finger. "I drew this the night before you left. I sat on the porch after you went home and cried because I was so sure I was going to lose you." "You didn't lose me," I said. "We were stolen from each other." She looked up. Her eyes were red but steady. "What do we do now, Arthur?" I didn't have an easy answer. I was 74. She was 72. We weren't the same people who had sat on a fence and dreamed about the Pacific. We were old. We were tired. We had lived entire lives shaped by a lie neither of us had known about. But we were also still here, still breathing, still capable of sitting at a kitchen table and feeling the same pull that had started with a sparrow on a piece of notebook paper. I said, "I don't know, but I know I don't want to drive away and pretend I never came." She studied me for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked to the counter, and put a kettle on the stove. "Then stay for tea," she said, "and we'll figure out the rest." I stayed for tea, and then I stayed for dinner. She made soup from the garden and bread she had baked that morning. We talked for hours. She told me about her life in Kentucky, the jobs she had worked, the friends she had made, the small art classes she taught at the community center. She showed me her paintings, landscapes mostly, hills and fields and wide open skies. In every single one, the horizon stretched farther than the eye could reach. She had never seen the Pacific, but she had been painting it her whole life without knowing. I told her about Helen, about James and Ruth, about the grandchildren, about the hardware store I had finally sold 2 years ago. I told her about the quiet house and the Sunday phone calls, and the way I sometimes set 2 plates at breakfast out of habit and then put one back before anyone could see. She didn't pity me. She just listened the way she always had, like what I was saying mattered. When it got late, I stood up and said I should go. She walked me to the door. We stood on the porch under the wind chime, and the night air smelled like cut grass and something sweet I couldn't name. "Arthur," she said. "Yes? Will you come back?" I looked at her. The porch light caught the silver in her hair. Her eyes were the same dark brown they had been when she was 20, sitting under an oak tree with a notebook full of sparrows. "Try to stop me," I said. She smiled. And just like that, 52 years of silence ended with a kettle, a bowl of soup, and 2 old fools standing on a porch, too stubborn and too grateful to pretend they didn't still feel what they had always felt. I drove home that night with the windows down. The road was dark and the stars were out, and I was crying again. But this time it was different. These weren't the tears of a man who had just discovered a betrayal. These were the tears of a man who had been given something he thought was gone forever. I visited Evelyn the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that. We fell into a rhythm the way old people do. Not with fireworks, but with soup and conversation and the slow, careful rebuilding of something that had been broken before it ever had a chance to stand. She showed me the garden behind her house, rows of tomatoes and herbs and wildflowers that reminded me of the ones she used to grow in Dalton. I brought her a new set of watercolor brushes because hers were worn down to the wood. She painted my hands while I sat at her kitchen table, and when I asked why, she said because they came back. My children took it differently. Ruth was the easier one. She drove out to meet Evelyn on a Saturday afternoon and came home with tears in her eyes. "Dad," she said, "she's wonderful, and she still has your sketch on her refrigerator." James was harder. He sat across from me at a diner and said, "Dad, you're 74. Don't you think this is a little late for a love story?" I looked at my son. "Your mother told me not to sit in an empty house and call it loyalty." I listened to her. It just took me 11 years. James didn't say anything for a while. Then he nodded once, the way men do when they don't have the words but understand the weight. 3 months after I knocked on Evelyn's door, I asked her to marry me. We were sitting on her porch in the rocking chairs, watching the sun go down behind the hills. I didn't have a ring. I didn't have a speech. I just turned to her and said, "I know we lost 52 years. I can't give those back, but I can give you whatever I have left. Every morning, every evening, every Sunday, if you'll have me." She looked at me with those dark brown eyes and said, "Arthur Holden, I've been waiting 52 years for you to finish that sentence." I laughed. She laughed. And somewhere between the laughter and the tears, we both understood that love at our age isn't about the years you have ahead. It's about finally stopping the clock on the years you lost. People will tell you that starting over at 70 is foolish, that two old people getting married is sentimental nonsense. But those people have never held a letter that was 52 years late and realized the only foolish thing would be to waste another day. We got married on a Saturday in December. Small ceremony, just family and a few friends. Ruth stood beside me. Evelyn's neighbor Margaret stood beside her. The pastor kept it short because Evelyn told him, "We've waited long enough. Don't make us wait through a sermon too." When I slipped the ring on her finger, her hand trembled, but her eyes were steady. After the ceremony, we drove to the coast. It took us 2 days. We stood on the edge of the Pacific Ocean on a cold, bright December morning, and Evelyn looked out at the water and didn't speak for a long time. I stood beside her and let her have the moment. Finally, she said, "It's bigger than I imagined." I said, "I promised I'd take you here." She took my hand. "You kept your promise," she said. "It just took a little longer than we planned." We stood there until our feet were cold and the wind made our eyes water. Then we turned around and walked back to the car, holding hands like two people who had earned every single step. I'm 74 years old. My wife is 72. We live in her little white house with the green shutters, and I'm building a small studio in the back where she can paint. I hung the sketch of the two of us on the fence above the fireplace. She added a new detail to it, a thin blue line along the horizon that wasn't there before. When I asked what it was, she said, "The ocean. I finally know what it looks like." Every morning I wake up and hear her moving in the kitchen. I smell coffee and bread and lavender, and for a few seconds I have to remind myself this is real, that the silence is over, that the letters were found, that the woman I loved at 22 is the woman sleeping beside me at 74, and the only thing that changed is that the sparrow finally got the life it deserved. My mother took 52 years from us. I can't forgive that, but I can refuse to let her take whatever years we have left. If you've ever lost someone, not because love ended, but because someone decided for you that it should, then you know the particular cruelty of a silence that was never yours. And if you're sitting in your own quiet house right now, wondering if it's too late to knock on a door you walked away from decades ago, I'll tell you what my daughter told me. If not now, when? Some love stories start with a spark. Ours started with a sparrow, got buried inside a Bible, and waited 52 years to be read. But it survived. And if love can survive 52 years inside the pages of a dead woman's scripture, then I promise you, it can survive anything.